just run your assessment over what we've heard. Is it going to work in terms of getting growth going?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. There's certainly loads to welcome here. Cancelling reversing rather the increase in national insurance. That'll be welcome news if you're a taxpayer, but it's also particularly welcome to those businesses who had to find the money to pay the employer's national insurance contribution. And that's like a flat tax on employing people, regardless of whether you're profitable or not. So that's extremely welcome. Obviously, the much publicised decision not to raise corporation tax is extremely welcome. The investment zone idea is really interesting, and if it's well targeted in order to drive regeneration as part of a levelling up agenda, and for those parts of the country that have found it so hard to attract investment and economic activity, that's very exciting as well, and particularly the commitment to have 100% tax relief on capital investment there as well. But there's a few notable gaps, and I think one of you, in the conversation you just had, you talked about this being a sort of direct challenge to Rishi Sunak, and there's another element in this as well, which is that he'd been quite keen to use tax policy to focus on all types of investment. We were hoping for a permanent extension to the so-called super deduction, 120% tax relief on capital investment, which is basically paying firms a little more, paying some of their costs back when they undertake capital investment. And he'd also been talking about using the tax system to incentivise training in the workplace, encouraging firms to do that through the tax system. And that kind of wasn't there, unfortunately. But overall, it's very hard to oppose what we've just heard, because it was all on the spending side. There was absolutely nothing about whether taxes had to rise to in some other area to pay for this. And if the government's got it right, and this will lead to an acceleration of growth, obviously that's in everyone's interests. But we simply don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, the other question to ask you, will it also lead to an acceleration in inflation? I know, obviously, that he said, look, this will reduce inflation by 5% because of the energy price cap deal. But clearly the Bank of England and what it said yesterday about maybe having to go further and faster on interest rate rises if this actually cooked up the economy. It seems that Kwasi Kwarteng and Andrew Bailey are not really on the same hymn sheet.
Yes, we're at a really interesting point in the economy on that, in that regard. I mean, there are some things that have been announced that will reduce inflation, and not just capping the price of energy, but also reducing business costs will mean that they won't pass through those costs to prices, and so that dampens down inflationary pressures. But if you think inflation is coming from there being too much demand in the economy and we can't supply things fast enough, then going for growth is an inflationary force. But if, however, you think that inflation, that perhaps is how inflation might have started globally, but now you're in a situation where inflation has become kind of baked into the economy, that everyone's expecting prices and wages to rise, then actually you might get to a situation where if the Bank of England continues to be very determined to bring it down, that people will begin to believe that it will come down, and then you can get growth with low inflation. But at this point, it's really hard to judge which way that will go. So I would say it's potentially risky, but doesn't necessarily lead to higher inflation.